Hi, my name is Nicholas Bohannon, and today I'm giving you a presentation on the worldview of City Slickers. City Slickers was a movie that came out on June 7th, 1991, and it's a Western comedy. The three main characters are Mitch, Phil, and Ed. Mitch is played by Billy Crystal, Phil is played by Daniel Stern, and Ed is played by Bruno Kirby. The director was Ron Underwood, and the two writing credits went out to Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel. I'm going to be analyzing this movie through the lenses of Kierkegaardian ethics. Kierkegaardian ethics has three stages: the aesthetic life, the ethical life, and the leap of faith into a faith life. I broke the movie down into 5 main plot points. The first one is Ed, Phil, and Mitch's vacation. That's when they go to Colorado to herd cows. The second one would be Curly's pep talk, which we'll get into later. The various disasters that they go through. Never leaving the herd behind. And Mitch's one thing. The aesthetic life is when you try to find temporary happiness through material things or people, but it steals the meaning of life because you're only chasing after temporary happiness. And then when you finally figure this out, this is when you get into the ethical life. The ethical life is basically you have a set code and set of instructions of how to act and how to live to be an ethical person. And while you may feel good about what could be happening, there's still no meaning to life, and you get kind of lost. And then when you figure this out, you then go into your leap of faith into a faith life. So this is basically when you go through self-exploration, where you kind of look inside, kind of find out what your purpose is, what you find meaning in, and it gives a purpose to your actions instead of letting the societal influences of the ethical life figure out what your actions should be. So before they go herding cattle, the consequences of the worldview that they have at the moment is that Ed, he's happy to cheat, happy to do whatever, he's always looking for the next thrill, but he's scared to settle down and have a kid with the woman that he met. Phil, he feels okay with the adultery. He's a little unhinged, but he's mad at his wife. He still feels like adultery was okay, and he's still looking for highs. And Mitch, he's looking for meaning in everything he does and not finding it, and is becoming depressed. As the characters go throughout the movie, they start to change and see life differently. One of the main examples is after they meet Curly. He's one of the cowboys. And one morning, Mitch was doing his coffee thing and started to make this really loud noise. And all the cows started running away. So Curly came up to Mitch and he said, "You're coming with me." And they went on a one-on-one exploration to go find the rest of the cows. And during one of their rides to look for the rest of the cows, Curly says to Mitch, quote, "One thing, just one thing, you stick to that and the rest don't mean shit." So this is when he told him that he knew the true meaning of life. Mitch was confused and he's like, what in the world is the one thing? So he spends the rest of the movie trying to figure out what his one thing is. After this, Curly and Mitch come upon a cow that's in labor. Mitch helps deliver the calf, and then after this, the mom was about to die, but it was just laying there suffering, so Curly shot it real quick to put it out of its misery. And then once they herd up the rest of the cattle, they got back to camp. Curly ended up just dying. No one really knew. He was just sitting there. And after this, Mitch felt lost again. He's like, what in the world? Why would this happen? So they just kept herding. They're like, we need to get the cows to the place. So they kept herding the cows. And then they laid up one night in their tents. And the rest of the cowboys that were with him, they got very drunk and started just shooting stuff. They were throwing up bottles, shooting everything. And then they brought the calf out and they were going to shoot it if Mitch didn't leave his tent. So Mitch finally came out there And then they started yelling and screaming at him. There was a big old fight, and his friends came to help him. And then Phil almost shot someone, but thank goodness he didn't. Finally came to his senses. And then after this, everyone except for Ed and Phil left the cattle because they're like, we can't survive out here by ourselves. We're just going to go back, find like places to live, places where people live. As Mitch was on his way back with the rest of the people, he got a little guilty and came to his senses and rode out to his friends Phil and Ed and helped them start herding the cattle. They couldn't believe he came back, and he really acted like one of the cowboys in a good way, like in a curly way. And then they went through a huge storm and stuff, and Mitch did everything he could to get all the cows back, and they somehow managed it through the storm. He ended up chasing the calf down like crazy. And then at the end of the movie, they'd all changed drastically. Ed started to find contentment in life and was ready to settle down with a woman and have a kid. Phil, he finally found happiness for the first time in like 20 years. And finally had some hope for the future. And then Mitch finally found his one thing that he'd been looking for his entire life. And finally was like happy and was like ready to live life. And his one thing was his family and Norman, which was the calf. And he ended up bringing the calf home with him. At the end of the movie, Mitch finally took his leap of faith. He'd found his smile, found his meaning, and figured out what his one thing was.